what we do and coming up with an agenda that we think would be productive to engage both the elected side and the appointed side effectively. So I think the best way to start this is perhaps to call out the elephant in the room, which is the number of new staff. So if I can, Ross Clicker, he is our new Director of Community Development. Patrick Ainsworth is our new Director of Economic Development. You know, of course, our Assistant CD Director, Steve Robles, and our Village Planner, Marcy Nyes. There she is. I mention all four of them because this is the first time, certainly for our two newest members, but this really completes the circle of a fresh look at our procedures, our codes, everything we do from the department that really has the most to do with our codes and our relationship with the business community. So I really think that tonight is an opportunity, and tonight's agenda was structured as such that the four of them were able to take a look at our codes, come up with ideas, come up with questions for you to wrestle with so that we can improve the way we do business. That is kind of the umbrella statement for tonight. It is to find ways to improve and to make every effort to make changes that position ourselves for success. So that's what you're going to hear tonight. There are really only two items for discussion as general topics. They are special use requirements and split zoning. And again, I ask that you look at these topics the same way we did in researching the presentation, which is it's an opportunity for improvement. And as you will hear from our Economic Development Director, and is perhaps obvious, with everything that's going on in the world with COVID, now is the time for us to really make strides in making sure that the ease with which we communicate with our business community and the better that we and faster that we can get them from idea to shovel in the ground, the more that we can guarantee the success of the Village of Wheeling as we compete with the region for really dwindling businesses. So that's why tonight really is such an opportunity. And of course, Director Clicker will go into much detail. So there's a bit of a handoff amongst everyone. Ross is our ringleader this evening. So Director Clicker, if you would begin tonight's presentations.
I think what I'll do here, so that everybody has a view of me, because I'll just kind of wander here in the middle, if that's all right. And I'll get rid of this thing so everybody can hear me clearly. As John, Manager Svandilas mentioned, we have been looking at our zoning code, our uses, just the zoning in general. We've been looking at those uses as to, do they make sense for not only today, but for tomorrow, considering what we're all going through with this pandemic and how it is impacting businesses. I think we have all seen the increased reliance, and I'm not going to try not to take too much away from what Patrick's going to add to this later on, but we've all seen the impacts of what the internet and online retail had been doing even before the pandemic, what they had been doing to retail. So we came with the attitude and looking at the use table. Are there uses that perhaps we're too stringent on because of the business practices have changed? Are there businesses we're too relaxed on? Again, because the business practices have changed. Are there uses even that we currently do not allow, but are maybe those internet-proof businesses that we should be considering for inclusion into our use table? We come before you tonight with no preconceived solutions to this. We have a few strong recommendations, but depending on how the conversation goes tonight, if we are directed as staff to do so, we will work with the Plan Commission to develop a full set of recommendations that will be fully vetted out through with the Plan Commission and the process that is available to us before it comes to the Village Board for ultimate consideration. So with that, one of the first things that I noticed when I came to the village, what is Wheeling known for? What is the moniker that Wheeling gets labeled with? We get labeled with Restaurant Row. Everybody around here in the northwest suburbs and the Chicago region for that matter, when you mention Wheeling, and specifically if you mention Milwaukee Avenue, we'll say Restaurant Row. When you look at our use table, there is not a single opportunity in our community for a restaurant to open without going through a special use process. Now again, we have labeled ourselves or been known to now be Restaurant Row. Especially now in the conditions and the business environment we're in, as we begin to come out of that, we need to make sure that the uses that are desirable to the village should have a streamlined approach. Restaurants, I believe, should be one of those. Yes?
Just to be clear, just because something isn't a special use doesn't mean that the permitting process and licensing process is less stringent.
No, exactly. The only thing that it would do, we would still do site plan reviews, we would still do appearance reviews, we would still do all of the normal reviews that we do. It's just that extra layer of special use where if I'm a restaurateur or a developer looking for a site to bring in my new restaurant concept, and I'm presented with 5 municipalities' properties, and 4 of them allow it as a permitted use, and 1 is a special use. Although it may not slow down the process because you're still gonna have to go through appearance review and site plan review, the perception to that restaurateur or developer is, that's gonna be harder for me to get. They might go to another community. So, that is one of the uses that we would like to really look at to emphasize this. And we're not saying throughout the entire village, maybe even with the restaurants not being a special use, but in that corridor, the B3 corridor along Milwaukee Avenue, in my opinion, it would make sense if we allowed restaurants in there as a permitted use. Now, we would still keep drive-throughs as a special use because those have extra layers of concern, if you will. The noise of the squawk box, the cars queuing out up into the parking lot. So there are issues that need to be addressed with those. So we're not saying all restaurants. We would say drive-throughs still need a special use. But your carry-out restaurant, your sit-down restaurant, we've talked about it, internally here. I asked the question again, being new, not knowing the process. I asked point blank, I said, does anybody on staff remember a restaurant special use that was denied? And nobody could come up with one. So again, that's an indication to me, if one is never denied, if everything has basically been deemed to be appropriate and acceptable to the village, then let's make it that. So that's definitely one of the uses that we would strongly recommend. And again, we'll work with the Plan Commission on developing that if the direction is that what we would like to see happen. There's many other uses that we could talk about. We did pass out the use table to everybody. We've blown it up and spread it out so that you can see some of these things. There are uses in our districts that zoning is typically a progression. And we have a B1, B2, B3. Let's look at the B districts to be specific. Usually zoning is a progression. B1 is your most restrictive because you want to protect the character of the community to a great extent. B2 is a little more relaxed. You want to allow a little bit more in. And B3 is kind of your general business district where, I don't want to say it's a free-for-all, but it's pretty much everything that is acceptable as a normal business practice would be permitted. When we would look through this table, we found uses that might be permitted in B1 and permitted in B3, but not even allowed in B2. So there's things like that. Again, we're not, I don't want to go through every one of those tonight because again, we're not providing a full solution to this. We just wanted to make it aware to you that there are some uses that we think we should examine, and we'd like to do that with the Plan Commission to really dive into this, make sure that the use table is appropriate for the village going forward. In light of that, kind of in that same vein, there are uses that the village has permitted that perhaps shouldn't be permitted uses anymore. And this is because the practices of the business type have changed. The main one that comes to, when I look through the use table that I see, are banks. Back in the day, bank meant 3-story Colt Taylor Bank building on the corner, 250 employees working in there that came and visited and stayed at the, participated in the restaurants, did some shopping at lunch or after work, and went. Bank today is essentially a glorified ATM machine with a technician who sits in the corner in case something goes wrong. But yet, our zoning would allow that use to go anywhere in our community and take prime retail space away from a user who may be coming in that would provide additional benefit to the village. So that's a use that we would like to see taken from a permitted to a special. Again, so that we can look at those issues that, what is your business plan of operating this bank? How many employees do you have? How many customers do you plan to see on a daily basis? Perhaps you don't need to be at the prime retail corner. You could be more in line and back, because again, banking has changed. I don't have my phone on me because I left it in case it rang, but everybody's phone is their bank now. I can't remember the last time I actually went to my bank. So the use of that type of use has changed. Our zoning, I think, should reflect that, and we should evaluate that. Again, if those uses are, if that's the direction we're given, we'll work with the planning commission on developing that.
Ross.
Yes.
In some cases, the banks finance the shopping center, for instance.
Correct.
And so they're the ones that said, we want a piece of this property. I know that was, I think, Chase Bank and Fresh Farms.
Right.
And that
But
was-
they've, even in that time frame, since Fresh Farms, 10 years ago, the model has changed drastically. In the previous community I worked in, Fifth Third Bank was building a new facility. It's at the corner of Gulf and Washington and Niles, if you're familiar with it at all. The building itself is under 1,000 square feet. Brand new building, they invested a lot of money in building it out. The building is less than 1,000 square feet. And what's in there? 2 glorified ATMs, a public bathroom in case you have to go to the bathroom while you're in there using the glorified ATM, and an office where the technician sits in case something goes wrong with the machine. This is the new model for new banks.
Does the new model include drive-ups as many?
It does, not usually as many lanes, but again, that's another reason to make it a special use rather than a permitted, so we can look at those traffic flows and patterns, because again, if you're gonna go to the bank, you're probably not gonna wanna get out of your car, so let's look at how the traffic flow works a little bit more. And then the banks that are there, what are they doing with those spaces? I mean, we've seen what, the proposals for the old Colt Taylor Bank property, but Chase Bank, they still want a presence, but a lot of their facilities now, so that they can offer an experience to their customers, are essentially converting their bank lobbies into coffee shops, where they give the coffee away and provide a workspace even for their customers to come in and work and have coffee and all that, and they're not charging for that. So that's not necessarily fair to our other retail businesses in town. So again, this is a type of use that we believe we need a little more input into. So there are uses that are special that we believe should maybe be permitted. There are uses that are permitted that we believe maybe should be special. Again, depending on how the direction of this goes, we would then work with the planning commission to develop that full list so that we can make a full recommendation to the board. So, special, that should be some permitted. There's permitted, that should be special. There's some other intricacies in our use table that are, like I said, that are a little bit questionable, and that, it should be a progression, and it doesn't seem to be that. The other thing that I mentioned is we need to provide for uses that, for lack of a better term, are internet proof. That maybe the village in the past has not wanted those uses in there. This is where, Patrick, if you could maybe offer some thoughts on how development in retail is going in general, and what the trends might be going for the future. wherever you like.
Yeah,
Is the recorders up there, it'd be easier from them to,
So I'm gonna stand from here if that's okay. Thank you, Ross.
Yeah.
So, to Ross's point, there's been a lot of trends.
Patrick, if you don't mind, just because the recorder's up there, and that way the plan commission doesn't have to turn around.
So, thank you, Ross. So to Ross's point, there's a lot of emerging trends in retail, and it's not your typical shopping center where everything is retail anymore. But to that effect, there are synergistic uses, and I'm gonna use Ross's, example he brought up earlier today, which was a swim school. Parents are there for over an hour, they probably want a coffee shop or a bagel shop, there might be a nail salon next door. Those create synergy. Those folks, those families spend more time in these shopping centers and these retail areas. When you see emerging trends, we hope to see emerging land use tables and land use categories that kind of help evolve to adapt and embrace these things. And it's not to say that we are trying to get rid of retail altogether. We will always embrace it, we always welcome it. But those uses that those uses that produce more time spent in those shopping centers sometimes yield more results in sales tax generation for those existing businesses. And one of my other slogan tokens is less vacancy, more vibrancy. So when we have a whole table that we have a slew of different uses that fills up these shopping centers, again, you're going to see more vibrancy in these shopping centers that yield hopefully more food users and whatnot. So to Ross's question about retail trends, as you see our own town center, we have a lot of entertainment and a lot of restaurant uses in one area. Not so much retail, and we have a couple of retail services here. That has been the trend. We have seen more sit-down restaurants, more fast casual restaurants in the retail industry in the past few years. But that's not to say that they are retail sales tax generators. So I think, again, with the goal from an economic development perspective is this use, think of this as what we'd like to see in our shopping centers, what cross-synergistic land uses there can be, and ultimately how we fill up our shopping centers and our commercial retail spaces again. Anyone have any questions on that?
So that's, as Patrick said, there's uses that aren't maybe traditionally permitted or viewed as acceptable, if you will. The swim school. Virtually impossible to get a swimming lesson online. This one has nothing to do with people that are in the room. Tattoo parlors. Absolutely impossible to get a tattoo online. But this is another one of those businesses where I believe the use itself has changed. Back in the 50s and 60s, tattoo parlors are where the bikers and sailors went to get mom or whatever put on their arm. Today, tattoo artists are truly that. They are artists. People seek them out. They will travel great distances to get tattoos from various artists. If we allow some of that, and we're not saying open the door and let everybody in, but if that's a use that maybe we permitted as a special use, and in not every zoning district, but maybe, now this is might even sound crazy, but in our town center, the rents that they would have to pay to be a tattoo artist in that center are gonna be quite high. So they're going to be the top-notch artists so that they can cover their rent. Those top-notch artists are going to bring their clientele with them. Their clientele will come spend multiple hours getting a tattoo. Hey, I need a dinner break. I need a lunch break. Wow, isn't that cool? There's a nail salon I can come back to. There's, again, as Patrick said, those synergies that are there. The swim school, same thing. As I mentioned, come for the swim lesson. Steve Robles, our assistant director, has shared. If you'd like to even just share what you've told me, Steve, about what your family does with the swim schools.
Yeah, it's very much like what Patrick said. Take my daughters to swim school on the weekends, and there's a coffee shop in that shopping center. There's lunch places, Panera, other places that we can go and grab a coffee before we have swim lessons, grab lunch afterward. The kids' haircutting places in there as well. So we don't just go and stay for that hour for the swim lesson. We're there either before or after as well, and spend more time than we would normally just going to the swim school and then leaving. So it's very much as Patrick described, you have that initial draw to bring customers into that center, then once they are there, they start to discover the other elements, the other stores, the other things that they can do there, and thus spend the time there longer and start to bounce around from all the different stores and shops and restaurants.
So that's basically the initial discussion or presentation, if you will, that we wanted to lay out, is yes, we want to look at special uses. Should they all still be there as special uses? Maybe some should be permitted. The permitted, should maybe some permitted uses be moved to specials? And are there uses that we currently do not allow for in our zoning code that perhaps we should consider? Again, no foregone conclusions. We don't have the use table ready to roll out and say, here it is. Depending on the discussion here tonight, we were hoping to get the direction to work with the Plan Commission on developing that so that we have community input and we have a truly vetted out list that will allow the Village of Wheeling to be successful today and in the future. So with that, before we get on to the next topic.
Yeah, so this might seem, like we're going on, but there's a reason. The reason is we are sensitive to the history in Wheeling. We know that there is an expectation that restaurants are special uses. So we're sensitive to the fact that particularly the Plan Commission, for the Plan Commission, this would be a major change. So, you've kind of heard some of the stories to emphasize the point that we think that needs to change, and we think it needs to change in the short term. As in, if it's okay, we would like direction this evening to start working on the legislation that would codify removing, and of course there are many specifics that we would work through with both parties, so we're not making blanket statements here. As Director Clicker said, you have to go zone by zone. But there's a short term and a long term. So the asks are, do you agree that we should begin the process of bringing to you formal adoption of removing the requirement for restaurants to be a special use? That's question number one. The other part of short term is, do you also agree that we can start talking about and bringing legislation to you to remove banks from being automatically allowed? That's important in the short term because once properties start becoming available, we want to make sure that we backfill them appropriately. So we don't want another bank to slide in there. Not that we have anything against banks, but certainly we would rather focus on some tax generating businesses. So that's why that is part of a short-term strategy. Those are the two questions we would like an answer to short-term. Long-term, we would just like to hear, particularly from the board, that you would like us to take a deep dive into these tables, understanding everything that Ross said and that Patrick said, and bring the Plan Commission some suggested changes, work with them to go through all the details, deep in the weeds, come up with a package that we can then bring you to update our use tables. So that's the short term and the long term. Two questions in the short term, and then to the board, would you like us to take that deep dive? Now, we realize, as has been said, that time is of the essence. So this will become a priority project for CD to start, and legal, to start putting that together, begin the conversations, the deep dive with the Plan Commission, and get back to you as quickly as possible so that this can hopefully be wrapped up during the winter so we're ready to go for some of those longer term issues, the use table come construction season for spring, when of course we will have a vaccine and everybody will be back to normal.
From your lips.
Trustee Krueger, you had a question?
Yes, I do, thank you, President Horker. My question is, and this may be a personal notion about special use for restaurants, but Ross, is there a reason that has to do with the health department sort of aspect of a restaurant, I guess?
No, the health department will still do a review of the kitchen build out, the whatever, even if it's just a cleanup of an existing restaurant. The health department does a review no matter what.
So changing that special use to something that's different would not change that at all?
No.
It would still be those safety measures in place? Okay, thank you.
We believe the origin of that, because there's nothing that we can find that specifically says this is why Wheeling does this, because please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It is absolutely atypical for a community to have the special use requirement for a restaurant. I mean, and you've got multiple communities that Ross has worked in, same with every other person I introduced earlier. It's not something you find in other communities.
No. The drive-through, yes, but the restaurant itself, no. There's enough. One, they're considered as desirable. Two, there's enough other reviews and controls that a special use is not really necessary.
So the conclusion that we've drawn is that appropriately, back in the day, Wheeling adopted the requirement of a special use to protect Restaurant Row. It was sort of the Lake Forest, there shall be no McDonald's here rule, that kind of idea. It was the idea that you had to, by requiring a special use, you could deny a special use. So we would control what types of restaurants were included in Restaurant Row. Perhaps that made sense 40 years ago. It really doesn't now, and more importantly, it keeps us from being competitive.
Could you do like 6 feet, please? You're a little close. I mean, I don't know exactly, but you're just kind of close. Thank you.
Are you gonna put your mask on or just leave it on the table?
I want to leave it on the table since I'm more than 6 feet from.
I don't think so, but
You can stand back, please. For me.
President Harker, if I may, I was gonna point of order a moment ago and ask if Ms. Wilson could take a seat and sit in. It's very distracting, and under the COVID situation, I'm not comfortable with her roaming around the room.
Would you mind just, you can keep filming, but could you just kind of like
keep a distance.
park yourself?
Thank you.
Sure.
Pick a spot, stay there maybe. Please. Oh, Mr.
I
Lang.
have a question. So, John, to maybe take a step further, with the way things are nowadays and how carryout had really helped save a lot of restaurants, are we taking a look, or can we take a look at how to increase carryout business and enhance that in the restaurants that have it now, or the ones that don't have it, a good carryout to, because you never know how if it's gonna need it again. And I'm talking about separate entrances, carryout windows, and so on.
Sure. We've talked about that, and there's a number of different answers because there's a different answer for each specific restaurant. Because it depends on the property itself, whether or not the property that restaurant is located on would accommodate another entrance, a drive-through perhaps. I mean, there are Jimmy John's drive-throughs, but our Jimmy John's wouldn't be able to accommodate a drive-through. So the answer is yes. I think we could talk about whether that type of improvement would qualify for a facade grant improvement if that restaurant is in a TIF district. As far as code amendments, there's really not a lot, because another aspect of doing anything to your restaurant is parking. Trustee Vogel and I had talked about whether there's an opportunity for some of these tents to become permanent in some fashion, not the tent itself, but the idea of outdoor dining. And the answer is yeah, and our code would allow that as long as the restaurant still had appropriate parking. And so from a code perspective, there's probably not a lot we can do, but from a staff's willingness to sit down with every restaurant and figure out what can be done, absolutely. And I think the facade grant can be an important incentive for restaurants to even think about, hey, curbside pickup, maybe there's just, well, you can't really deal with your handicap spaces, but perhaps you could dedicate a side aisle or something just for curbside pickup, because this stuff isn't going away, whether COVID does or isn't. It's becoming part of our culture.
We've also wanted to make sure that we encourage or allow the creative trends in dining. Everybody hears about the food halls now down in the city and all that, and that works great when you have a large population for office workers and that, but as we've all seen with the pandemic, that's not really the case for many places right now. The new concept that we've heard is being developed, and we want to make sure that we are ahead of this, is essentially what the term they use is called a ghost kitchen. But essentially what it is a food hall for the suburbs. You don't go there to eat, but 5 or 6 restaurants all have a kitchen in one spot, and the Uber driver comes in and picks up from all of them and delivers out. So we want to make sure that we allow for that creativity and for those trends as well.
Mr. Rufato and Mr., sorry, Trustee Rapatos.
So one of the, it seems that I remember all restaurants who come in, they would always most likely require a parking variation. Are we looking at the parking that is attached to these? Are we looking at that as some changes?
We can certainly look at that, though
Because
the
then
use
you're
itself.
not avoiding, and maybe the big part is the special use and what they have to do there, but then they would still have to come in for a parking variation.
And we can look at the parking requirements. Yes, I agree. Parking regulations from the sixties and seventies probably aren't appropriate nowadays. You know, so maybe we can look at the parking regulations. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the use,
Right.
but it is something we could look
But
at.
if you're trying to, reduce the number of meetings that they have to go to, right, they have to have, and there's an expense involved in that.
Yes.
Instead of having to come to a meeting and then come to our meeting for special use, we can take care of all of that in one.
Sure.
That would probably be good. And then, just as an aside, I'm all for this, and I think we need to review our special use tables, but I would just like them time bound. When would we get something back? Saying winter or something, I'd just like to put some time frame around that as to not the short term.
Sure.
Understand that, but the long term of reviewing this.
I'm only smiling at Ross because this is really my opportunity to mess with the department, but I'll be nice and I'll let Ross set the timetable.
I can't give you a specific date today, but based off of other previous experiences and that, I wouldn't want to put words in Marcy's mouth right now. She knows the workload that's coming up with the plan commission and the reviews and that. But I would feel comfortable in saying that we could have the full deep dive done within 6 months.
Something a little bit shorter, but that's fine.
It could be shorter than that. I don't want to.
You know your workload, so.
Well, we're looking at a whole sign code redo, that we'd like to prioritize. We have to balance it, but that was something.
Oh, that's fine, yeah, I don't
on our
know your
list as
workload,
well,
so
so.
that's fine.
And that still just gets us to February,
Sure.
6 months.
Okay.
Do you wanna, Trustee Volkman?
I can't throw that far. Three things. Do special use automatically trigger a public hearing?
Yes.
So this would help alleviate some of the public hearings, because when I watch plan commission meetings and they say, does anybody in the audience have anything to say, it's kind of like a blank stare, because nobody's there for a restaurant special use, but it does cost, there's work involved in posting for the public hearing, correct? And you have to follow the rules, so this would be helpful on that. And I'll admit it, I'm the one who's been bugging John for quite a while about tattoo parlors. It just doesn't make sense to me. If somebody could tell me why we put this big taboo on something that,
Same reason we prohibited a Harley Davidson shop.
so it was just somebody decided that was evil. And
Yeah.
we don't really prohibit
$50,000,
Harley
$60,000
Davidson shops,
motorcycles, yeah.
do we? I mean, we do, can we put that on the list?
Well, I think we turned one away years ago.
Yes.
So let's put that on the list. Needless to say, I'm all for this.
And thank you for taking me off the hook on that.
Sorry.
I did see everybody's face.
Yeah, it was me.
All set? Trustee Rapatos?
Yes, thank
Didn't
you.
mean to cut you off. that's
Nope,
fine. Okay.
nope.
Trustee Volk?
Yeah, so far, everything, as you started out, I agree with the restaurants and the banks. When you started talking about, a tattoo parlor is a small place, maybe 1,200 square feet. Not a lot of taxes we're gonna generate from that, either sales tax, I don't think it's any sales tax. But if you start talking about putting a swimming pool for swimming lessons in a shopping center, that's a huge building you're gonna lose sales tax on. And is the peripheral, me going to buy a couple cups of coffee or a sandwich, gonna make up for the loss of the taxes from something like that?
I guess really the answer on that one is if the swim school isn't there, what's the probability of a sales tax generator coming in? And
Yeah, so, Should I go up there?
Yeah.
Well, I guess
Good,
my,
you're a step
my,
up.
my other question is, does the swimming pool really draw restaurants?
Oh my God, yeah, the one in Buffalo Grove?
There's
Yeah.
restaurants built up around that?
center, I think.
Yeah.
So to answer that question, the ICSC has a spreadsheet that gives us of the average size of these uses. They range between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet, which is between a small Walgreens and a big Walgreens. If you have a 150,000 square foot shopping center that's half vacant, that's 75,000 square feet. That 15,000 square feet that's occupied is going to bring in hundreds, if not thousands of people and hundreds of families throughout the week that are new customers because they are spending half hour to an hour in the Walgreens, in the shop, in the grocery store, et cetera. The one that's closest to me is in Hoffman Estates, and every time I go to drop off something at Goodwill, I see 5 or 6 parents going to those other uses for synergistic areas. So we are not saying we're gonna have a whole shopping center of swim lessons. It is a combination of uses that's really gonna help drive up sales and drive traffic to that shopping center, which inherently does help bring in more retailers and more. And the other last thing I'll say is, there are some businesses that want to be close to these retail sales tax areas. They're called co-tenancy requirements. So for example, Starbucks loves to be next to or inside of a Target because it's about the same demographic. You're attracting a certain clientele, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, it's expensive to put kids in swim lessons, but you got some disposable income, and those shops will reap the benefits from that.
And exactly, I know it's not Wheeling, but in a previous community that I worked in, which was Niles, we went through a process where we started allowing some of these uses, swim schools being a main one, and the same concerns were addressed then. But we can show statistically, Niles has approximately 1,000 sales tax generating businesses in the community. It used to be 1,200. But the vacancy rate in Niles has actually gone down, and there hasn't been retail space demolished. The vacancy rate has gone down, but yet total sales tax collection has increased. When you add all that up, that means exactly what Patrick was saying, is that those co-tenancies, those people coming to that swim school are driving additional sales that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So is it a direct dollar for dollar? Like if you had retail in that square footage, are you gonna make up? I would venture it's going to be even higher, because 15,000 square foot of retail, unless it's a Walgreens, a Ross Dress for Less, or something along that nature, its retail sales are probably gonna be between $5 and $10 million a year. If a swim school comes in and increases the sales at the rest of the center, I would safely say that it's going to increase sales by 10 to 15 million in the rest of the center. So those types of uses. The volleyball club is another one. If you've never seen a volleyball club when they have a tournament, wow, is there something you should see? Gymnastics gyms, same thing. I've spent many a Saturday at the gymnastics gym down in the industrial park here in Wheeling. If that would have been in a shopping center, I would have dropped my kids off for their birthday parties instead of just sitting there playing on my phone. I would have gone into retail, to the retail establishments next and just browsed. So those are the types of uses. It seems counterproductive, but it actually enhances.
Thank
Other
you, Mr.
than the
Gold.
shadow behind me, other than the shadow behind me, is there anything we can do? Pull a sun visor or something back there?
No, it's down, it is down.
Should we leave?
No,
You can switch with me. I'm holding the wall up here.
it's direct line. Do we have, any other questions? I think we could pull the board.
Yeah.
Excuse me, one quick question. What is the village's stance on things like food trucks? Do we allow them, or?
Yes, those are allowed, mobile food vendors are allowed. They're licensed through the business license and health license. But primarily, they're not allowed to stay on village roads and block traffic or anything like that. So you primarily only see them within the industrial areas for lunch breaks, things like that, where they park on private property.
I was just curious, I haven't seen it.
I would like to address
Yes, and Ross, is it appropriate to frame it as simply, removing the requirement for special use for a restaurant, period, or do we want to define it as, I mean, look, we're not gonna go crazy, because everything has to be approved anyway, so.
Redoing it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Jeff.
I couldn't think of commissioner.
Okay, so we have new people here that work in different communities. Is there only 2 designations in all the other communities, permitted and special use?
Yes.
Is there no other designation?
Permitted and special are the standards.
I just would think that we could come up with a different designation for some of the things, but then it would be even more confusing, so.
Well, you would have to add, excuse me, but you would have to add, for instance, you were talking about drive-through restaurants. Those would still have to be a.
Right.
Special.
In our current
Special,
zoning.
so you would have to add additional uses.
We actually already have it in there, right now we have sit-down restaurant, carry-out restaurant, drive-through restaurant.
Right.
So, what we would be looking at, or our recommendation would be is to take the sit-down and carry-out restaurant and make them a permitted, at a minimum in the B3. But if you'd like to look at other zoning of it too, we feel because of the history of the special uses that they would be appropriate in other B districts as well.
Would it be, you mentioned it would be possible to allow them in specific areas as well, like Restaurant Row. So,
Well, that's, if you, I know it's a little small here, but Restaurant Row is essentially right here, the red that you see, which is pretty much almost all of our B3 zoning in town. So if we've made it a permitted use in B3, we've essentially, that's what we're saying, is that Restaurant Row is permitted.
Okay.
And that was the motivation behind this, besides the general idea, we need to be competitive, we need to shorten the time frame from concept to shovel in the ground. You know, as an aside to all of this, we are working on a revitalization program for Restaurant Row. And we want to make the idea that we've streamlined the process part of the package that we can shop to potential restaurants. And, you know, in speaking with the experts, that's what developers are looking for. Yes, they're looking for money, but they've got, you know, restaurant businesses typically, they don't care what their address is. They have a concentric circle where they realize where their marketplace is, and whether it's Wheeling or across the street in Buffalo Grove or across the street in Northbrook, or they've got a concentric circle that's a mile, 2 miles wide. Anywhere within that circle, they know they're going to be successful. That's how their data works. So we need to make sure that whatever package we offer a potential developer, restaurant or otherwise, is as clean and neat and effective and user-friendly as possible. So that, although we're not talking about, you know, the Restaurant Row revitalization tonight, this is part of that, and it's really kind of the foundation of it. There's many more facets of that program, financial, marketing, et cetera, but this really helps get the ball rolling.
The old adage that you hear from people all the time is that, there's 3 rules in real estate: location, location, location. My joke that I always use when I talk to developers and they chuckle and they say, actually, no, you're right. It's location, entitlements. If I can find a location and I can be entitled to be open there faster than my competitor down the road, that's worth more to me as a developer than any incentive, financial incentive that a village can offer. Time is money to a developer. Their time is way more valuable than anything. So again, if the use is something that we desire in town, if we can entitle them quicker and more efficiently than the neighboring communities, we're gonna be more successful.
Trustee Vito?
Does the bank with the drive-through now need a special use?
Yes.
Yes, the drive-through is always a special use.
Yeah, because if it does, then I don't see the reason to up the classification of it. I mean, I'm thinking in my head, I can only think of one bank in the area, the one in Buffalo Grove on 83, the Chase by the Jewel up there, and 83 in Lake Cook that doesn't have a drive-through.
Right.
It's in a shopping center, which is something you could probably just say, yeah, go ahead anyway.
But again, the banking industry itself has changed so much I agree with you. Is a bank today gonna come in without a drive-through? No, but who knows what it's gonna be in 5 years from now? They might chuck the whole idea of doing drive-throughs because the volume is down so low, and all they need is a space to have the corporate location, you know, and then they could go in line. And again, do we wanna, I think this is preparation for the future on it. You know, do we want them to come in and occupy a prime retail space when we could maybe steer them to, I don't wanna say a subprime, but a B or C classification, location where it's not gonna harm us and actually might help that center because it does, you know, there will still be foot traffic coming to it because of a bank.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I would like, just to hear from the trustees, yea or nay on reviewing just the restaurants and banks. Trustee Vito,
Yes.
trustee Papantos,
Yes, and I'd say restaurants in all B class, B1, 2, and 3.
trustee Rufato,
Yes.
trustee Krueger,
Yes.
trustee Lang.
Yes.
Trustee Vogel,
Yes.
yes also. So then that's.
So we'll bring back specific language that you can then vote on regarding those two topics. Of course, we'll run everything first through the planning commission, but that's gonna be the expedited short-term goal for staff. The second item then is the longer, let's do the research, because this may be then multiple meetings with the planning commission to make sure that we get the deep dive correct. That's the second question about the special use table.
Did you have a recommended phrasing on that question that you were comfortable with?
I think it's just making sure that everybody is okay
Right.
with the idea.
Trustee Rufato, you have a
So
concern?
just to amplify what trustee Lepanto said, looking at restaurants in B1 or B2 also,
Mhm.
would that be long-term or are we looking at?
No, that'd be short.
Short-term too,
Yeah.
okay,
Anything pertaining to restaurants.
okay, great, thank you. That's-
So then, given the deep look into the, permitted versus non-permitted uses throughout the entire table of uses.
In the entire special use table, yes.
Okay. I would, planning commission, thank you for coming. Do any of you have concerns about this? Lots of blanks, there isn't, no concerns, okay.
It's like, nope.
Okay. Should we go forward with this, trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee
Absolutely.
Krueger?
Yes.
Trustee Rufato? Trustee
Yes.
Santos? Trustee Vito? Thank you. So, and I'm a yes as well.
Excellent, thank you. Which brings us to item number 2 then.
Right. The other thing, now this, I'll admit, this is a pet peeve of mine, but it does create issues. And the pet peeve is split lot zoning. When you have one lot of record and the zoning is multiple things on it. We have several areas in town that show that, he's coming up to pull up the GIS map so we can show some of these areas. And I had assumed this, but actually being here tonight for this meeting confirmed it. If you walk out into the map room, out here, my assumption is that our zoning, especially concerning industrial, was established before the areas were developed. And so there were things that came in that a consultant probably came in and said, well, you know what, as you're establishing your zoning and looking at this, there should be a buffer between residential and your industrial. Your light industrial or your I-1 should buffer between the residential. So we didn't have any development in this area, so the question was asked, well, what's that good buffer? And they said, well, 300 feet. So you can look on our zoning map, and even on our zoning map, there is an indicator on the black and white print version that shows that that is 300 feet. Now what happened then is the development started happening, and we wind up with things like this on Foster Avenue, where the first 50 feet of the property are I-3. The remaining 200 plus feet, or 300 feet, are I-1. Is that really a big issue? It is when you have a user who comes in that is acceptable or usable for the I-3, and they want to occupy a property, but they can't, because their use will spill over into the I-1 side. Or they have to go through and somehow demise the building so that the I-1 is separated from the I-3. And this can cause problems in getting properties reoccupied. So especially in this area, what we would like to look at, are there areas that make more logical sense today now that we've had development occur in the area? So like, again, along here on Foster, it seems pretty clear and pretty easy to say, let's just use Foster Avenue as the delineation between I-1 and I-3. There's areas along Palatine Road that are even more confusing. I know that the Plan Commission and the board recently heard the user who came in there had 3 zonings on it. It had I-1, it had I-2, and it had I-3.
Are there any I-3s along that Foster Avenue side that would become all I-1? Or would it cause a problem?
In this case, well, again, we would examine this on a much deeper level in this. We just want to know if this, again, this is literally my pet peeve. So this is why I'm bringing this forward for discussion on this. If the board agrees, we'll take the deep dive and we'll make sure, or we'll do our best to make sure that nobody's going to be adversely impacted by doing this. But in this case, almost every one of these buildings along Foster here are back over 50 feet from the, so what's zoned I-3 is their parking lot. So, again, let's just move the I-1 line up to the right of way and be done with it.
Within his first week, Ross came to me and said, look, man, I looked at your zone and you've got some issues. This is definitely under the category of cleanup. And the first question I asked was, well, now wait, I mean, as we present this, it would be logical that someone would ask, what's the negative impact to any existing business? And it's one of those things, again, where it's a larger question of, do you want us to spend the time, kind of, and maybe it's even more notification, because we should clean up the code. We just don't want to start spending time going down a road if you all think that it's a bad idea. But the answer is, it really is a case-by-case basis, like we were talking about preparing for restaurants that want to do carryout. And we'll do that. We'll do the deep dive. But in my 30 years here, we've never had a conversation about split lot zoning. And so to me, it was a big enough deal where I said, I think this is a great thing for the Plan Commission and the board to hear about, and then we could talk about how to deal with it. So that's why it's before you this evening.
Trustee Lang, you have a question?
So while he had that slide up, pet peeve of mine, and Ross and I talked about this, and Steve, down in that corner right there, that should be MXT.
Yep.
And we have not encouraged anyone to build on that terrible shopping center, and it should be MXT for certain.
We haven't until this afternoon when Patrick brought me an idea. But yes, you are.
I think, is that the swim club?
Better.
But just,
Two-car like-
it's right there by Prospect Heights train station.
B3 right now? What is it right now?
It's, yes, the red is B3.
Red is B3.
Should have tacos in there?
Yeah.
Store? Slow your roll.
We can preserve the tacos.
No, in the
center.
in the grocery store, they sell tacos.
Oh, you've been in that?
And now they're busted, now. Don't take down the taco.
So they're good, huh?
Yes. Get them while you can. Get them while you can.
And the reason you're closed is trustee veto.
We'll have Patrick find him a new spot.
So that's, there's not a lot of further discussion that I wanted to bring forward on that, just really, just to highlight areas like that, and just ask the question point blank, is this something we should look at? And now this won't be an immediate solution, because yes, there will have to be a lot of research into how the properties are used now, and if we change the zoning under it, is it going to negatively impact them, so.
What's the yellow spot?
That's a
residential.
That's a residential.
You get that for water or what?
Probably. But even looking along Wolf Road over there, you have the I-1 buffer, but if you look at all the uses that are along there, they're all I-3s. So yes, a buffer is a good idea, but the way it developed up, it really kind of buffered itself, because these big businesses came in, and the big developers came in, and they looked at Wolf Road and said, wait a minute, it's a 2-lane road. It's probably gonna be 4-lane at some point. So let's pull our buildings back so we don't get the knock on the door from the highway authority saying we're taking your property. So they're set back already. So this might be a case where as we look at it, we just eliminate the I-1. I don't know. Again, we have to do a deep dive into really to see how it's gonna impact each individual parcel. But
So then the question is, does the board want to allow you a deep dive in your swim school? Any other questions from the planning commission? Great, it's going to be here in person. Any questions, planning? Then trustee Vito? Want to look at it?
Yes.
Time? Nice, trustee Vito.
What?
Do,
Yeah, yeah.
no, I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Trustee Rapato?
Yes.
Trustee Rapato?
Yes.
Trustee Krieger?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well.
those are the topics I wanted to cover with you tonight. So I thank you all for your time on this and your feedback, and we will bring forth the restaurants and bank very quickly, and we'll take that deep dive with you, with the planning commission, and really start working on that in the upcoming months.
Did we cover the taboo tattoo parlors and things like that?
It'd be part of the
That'll be
special
part of the
use,
deep dive.
yeah, it's part of the deep dive in the special use table.
Are there any other questions or comments from any part of the planning commissioners, trustees? If not, no official communications. I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Was that trustee Ravallo? Second trustee Krueger. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all for sharing your evenings.
Do we have to adjourn our meeting?
Oh, yeah, planning commission also needs to.
We need to also make a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor? Aye. Yeah, because we're. I have a meeting.
I told you. Don't throw your name tags away, I want those, I'll pick them up. Please.
But that said,
Is the proper pronunciation Huda? Thank you. I like to say names properly if I can. See you later.
Of course, I enjoy it.
Got a hall pack.
Thought he'll put his mask on after he gets outside, but he didn't have his mask on in the meeting, which is kind of crazy.
And so, and I will keep everybody. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. See you. See you.
Well, those are never wrong. Everything. I'm just gonna. Oh, not our tree. Or our, he's gonna come, he's gonna care.
Oh, yeah.
Karen, I'm gonna call you.
What? That's mine. He's never been a tree.
I figured that.
That was pre her time. It's the first one in the day. It's the perfect time.
I did, I felt all that.
I was laughing.
Let's go on. Yeah, we got that one. They're gone? Okay, I hadn't followed up on it, but I know they did. I would think because we got a bunch of hands. And then one, lo and behold, one turned into a rooster. And it's like, yeah, but the other two are the hands. It's like, I know. It's a pet thing, but I still say we take care of it. I'm assuming they're gonna have chickens in over the weekend, but they're not there anymore, so.
Oh, God, yeah. My kids used to know.
He didn't know the rules, and he's supposed to stop after a while. Somebody forgot to give him the rules. You never know when you're gonna get.
Oh, that's not okay. I mean, I do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is Brooke doing well? Is she okay? She's fine. Yeah, she had a prior engagement tonight.
Sure, sure. That time of year, sure.
Okay, Valentine's Day.
I am not an idiot.
So it actually is Valentine's now. Wait, closed today? Why are they closed? Oh, they're closed Tuesday. Who's closed on Tuesday and Wednesday?
Right.
It's a holiday.
There's also a
That's a long way to go from here.
Well, then I'll just go stand outside.
But it's true. Thank you, officer.